Whenever you're ready. You gotta be comfortable.
Exciting.
Ready?
Okay. Unbelievable. I can actually see your I can see it. I can see your whole face. I can see your eyebrows and your eyes.
This is for the rest of your life.
That's incredible.
Hey, good morning, everyone. If we haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name's Garry. I'm one of the pastors here. Really glad that you've decided to spend some of your day with us today. Just before we get started, it's hard to believe that today marks 1 year since we first live streamed. When we moved to live stream, the first one was done from the theater. The following week, we shifted to here where we are now at the underground. And so I just wanted to take a moment to thank the crew that's made up of staff and volunteers that have made Sunday morning live stream possible. They work super hard every week to make this happen. We are always coming up with new ideas to keep you guys engaged in what's happening here on Sunday. So if you're in the chat room, just give them the hearts, the claps, whatever, just to show your appreciation for that crew. Without them, this doesn't happen. But I also want to thank you, the meeting place, those that call the meeting place home, even those that are just jumping in for the first time and trying out this new thing. We're in this new time together, and thank you for sticking with us. This has been a really strange time, but it's great to know that you guys are tracking with us. And, you know, all by going by the reports, it looks like we'll be together sooner rather than later in the very near future. When that is a viable option for us as a church, you will be the first to know. And I will, just like I am, you are, we're all looking forward to that day. And it's coming. And we just have to kind of hang in there and just remember, we're doing this to keep each other safe and show our love for one another. But it is coming. So, what'd you think of that video? Did you get something caught in your eye? A little bit of watering happening there? Isn't that incredible? Like, wow, unbelievable what technology can do. But if you take it even a step back, glasses, these things right here, they're an amazing invention. But at the same time, they are such a pain in the butt. If you wear glasses, you know what I mean. For me personally, going out in the rain now is like an adventure, you know. You've got raindrops all over them. Coming in from the cold into a warm building, a home, or whatever it happens to be, it all fogs up. So then you can't see, so you take your glasses off to clean them, and you can't see because you can't see without your glasses. It's this weird thing you get stuck in. Now wearing masks. Every time you breathe, you can't see anything. But they are amazing. I got glasses when my arms were too short all of a sudden. I couldn't see anything I was holding up in front of me. I couldn't get it far enough away to focus. But maybe you're tuning in this morning, and for you, glasses have been a part of your life for as long as you can remember. You've just always worn glasses. And if that describes you, I want to ask you a question. Do you remember who told you it was that you needed glasses? Like, did you figure it out for yourself, or was it a parent, a teacher? One day after school, my wife and I, we picked our kids up from school, 3 daughters, and we took them to Dairy Queen. We said, you know, you guys have been doing really good. We're going to take you to Dairy Queen for an ice cream treat. But here's the deal. You have to read the menu board and tell us what you want. We're not trying to figure it out for you. You need to tell us. And so off we went, and we're standing there, and right away, my eldest daughter, Holly, and our youngest, Emily, figured out what they wanted. It was something really sweet and sticky, like a marshmallow sundae or something. But our middle daughter, Carly, is standing there staring at the menu board. And I'm like, do you know what you want? And she's, well, no. And I said, well, hurry up. You know, your sisters are waiting. There's people in line waiting. The cashier's waiting. like, pick what you want. And she goes, well, I can't. And I said, why? And she says, I can't read it. I can't read the menu board. And I'm like, what do you mean you can't read the menu board? You know how to read. You're in grade 4. And she's, okay, it's not that I can't read it. I can't see it. Right away, my wife and I, Lori, we look at each other and we're kind of feeling about this big. It's like we're her parents and we don't even know our kid can't see. Like, how embarrassing is that? And so right away I said, well, here's a question. Can you see the chalkboard at school? And she looked at me, she goes, well, I don't know. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? You either can or you can't. She goes, well, I don't know if I can or not. And at first I'm starting to think, what is she talking about? And then it dawned on me. She didn't know because to her, what she was seeing was normal. And she didn't know if that was any different than anyone else was seeing it. And so all of a sudden it made sense. It's like, oh, okay, she doesn't know what she doesn't know. Well, get this. My wife, 2 weeks earlier, had made an appointment for herself, because she wears glasses and wanted to get her eyes tested, at the ophthalmologist. And right away she said, well, I'm taking Carly, because we need to figure out how bad her eyesight is. So the next day, it happened to be the next day, and we took her, and the eye doctor comes out after the exam, and he goes, wow, I'm surprised that nobody has noticed that she can't see. And again, we're feeling about this big. It's like, yeah, it's just kind of weird. I don't know how that would happen. And he said, her eyesight's so poor that she wouldn't be able to drive legally without glasses. We're thinking, ooh. And so she got a prescription. About 2 weeks later, the glasses show up. And I remember we were driving to school, and we were stopped at the lights, traffic lights at Ald's Road in the Island Highway, heading towards Woodgrove Mall. They went to Pleasant Valley School. And as we're sitting there waiting for the light to change, Carly pipes up from the back seat and says, oh, that's what that orange blob is. It's the Home Depot sign. Like, have you seen the Home Depot sign? Like, it's what, the letters are 10 feet high? We had driven past that thing countless times, and I knew what it said. My other daughters knew what it said. But to Carly, it had always been just this orange blob. But once she got her glasses, she could suddenly see what she couldn't see before. And it was like you could hear the words, she was blind, but now she sees. Right? From that old hymn, Amazing Grace. It's interesting, is those words, I was blind, but now I see. Those words are actually found in the story that we're going to look at today. That's where they come from. This story is of a man who was born blind. He's never seen anything before. And he has an encounter with Jesus and gets his physical sight back. But he gets way more than just his physical sight back. This story is found in the 4th book of the New Testament. It's named after the guy who wrote it, a guy named John. So you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We've looked at a few stories as we've tracked through this series called Who, where we're trying to get to know Jesus better than we currently do so that we can learn to trust him more than we currently do. And John's whole letter that he wrote that's now in the Bible was to help people see who Jesus was, that he was God in the flesh. He wasn't just some great teacher. He was more than that. He was God in the flesh. And this is a great illustration of that. So here's how the story all went down. Really cool story. It says, as Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, all those that were, close followers, why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? Very strange question. And so I just want to give you some background, the backstory, to put that into context. One of the common beliefs back then, I'm not sure how much it is now. I tried to find out, I couldn't, but back then there was a strong belief that there was a direct connection between what was happening in your life, sickness and disease, and sin. And if you were sick or had some disease, it was because God had cursed you for it. And maybe it was your parents did something really, really bad, and so it was transferred over to you. But they also had this belief that babies could actually sin in the womb. which is kind of weird. It's like maybe they didn't clean up their womb or something, right? So they're sinning. It sounds really strange, but that's what they believed. And it's a strange, strange theology, but thankfully, Jesus kind of blows it out of the water. He decisively demolishes that whole thought when he said this. He says, it was not because of his sins or his parents' sins. This happened so that the power of God could be seen in him. Now, when I was a kid and I used to read that verse, I'd think, well, that's weird. Why? That would be weird that God would make this guy blind so he could get the glory, like the pat on the back, the accolades. It was like he was a narcissistic, insecure deity living in the sky, right? But is that really what God is like? Is he some just egotistical, self-absorbed being that cares more about himself than anyone or anything else? According to Paul, he's a guy we talk a lot around here. He was a religious zealot. And he went from church persecutor to church planter after having an incredible encounter with the resurrected Jesus on this road. He was on his way to this town to arrest a bunch of Jesus followers to kind of stamp this whole thing out. And he runs into the resurrected Jesus, and everything changes for him. And he starts planting all these churches, and he's writing letters to these churches. And in one of them, he writes this. Listen, he's basically saying, look, if you want to know what God is like, you only need to look to Jesus, because Jesus is God in the flesh. And here's what he writes. Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. And so the question becomes, well, what was Jesus like? That's kind of what we're trying to figure out here as we go through this. But we know he was full of compassion, he was full of mercy, grace, love, forgiveness, patience, kindness. And we see all of that in what Jesus is about to do next. Check this out. So after Jesus has his back and forth with his disciples about, who sinned, this guy or his parents, and kind of blowing that out of the water, we read this. It says, then he, Jesus, spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. Now, how awesome is that? I mean, if that doesn't shatter any images that you may have of Jesus being, Mr. Prim and Proper, and he's got the straight white teeth and a little baby lamb over his shoulders, then I don't know what will. Because Jesus isn't just spitting here. He's working up a big, you can just picture it. God, just working up the spit because he wants to make some mud. Now, just for a second, put yourself in the place of the blind guy, okay? You're standing there, you can't see anything, and you're hearing this discussion that you've probably heard countless times in your life about, well, so who was it? Was it him that sinned or his parents that he's blind, right? And you've heard that story who knows how many times. And then all of a sudden you hear this. Well, he's blind, so God's power can be seen in him. You're like, And then you hear someone going, and hack on the ground. That'd be weird. The next thing you know, someone's smearing mud all over your eyes. And I don't know, maybe that's where we get the saying, here's mud in your eye. I don't know, but wouldn't that be bizarre? Series of events? So here's a question that came up for me. Maybe it does for you too. It's like, why mud? What's the mud all about? Why didn't Jesus just say, like he did on so many other occasions, for people that couldn't walk, he'd just say, stand up and walk. There's no magic potion on their legs or anything. Another guy that was blind, he said, can you heal my blindness? And Jesus said, yeah, you can see. And all of a sudden the guy could see. So what's with the mud? Well, we're going to get the answer to that in just a bit. So just kind of file that away for a second. But right after he kind of rubs mud in this man's eyes, he says, now go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. And so the man went and washed and came back seeing. He came back seeing. It's kind of an anticlimactic way of describing what happened, isn't it? I mean, here's a guy, he's born blind. He's never seen a sunset, never seen a sunrise. He can't tell purple from pink. He's never, ever seen his mom or his dad or himself for that matter. And John writes, he came back seeing. It's like, really? Like, Max Lucado, he's a pastor and author. He wrote this about John's seemingly lack of enthusiasm around this miracle. He goes, come on, John. You're running short of verbs? How about he raced back seeing? He danced back seeing. He roared back, whooping and hollering seeing. Now that would be more like it, wouldn't it? Now, as awesome as this guy receiving his sight is, I would suggest John does that for a reason. Because that's not the whole point of the story. You see, like all the miracles Jesus performed when he was here on earth, the miracle that he performed always pointed to either himself or some deeper spiritual truth that we could learn. I mean, don't get me wrong, he cared about people and he healed lots of people. But there was always something bigger going on. Jesus had another agenda that he was working on. And it was to reveal who he was to those that were trying to figure out who he was. And we get a glimpse of what's happening in this story after this guy comes back seeing. Listen to this. His neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, and others said, no, he just looks like him. Couldn't be him. I love this, but the beggar kept saying, yes, I'm the one. It's like it's me. Trust me. I know me. It's me. Right? And they're all sitting there, oh, well, what? They're deliberating over whether it's him or not. And so they asked, well, who healed you? What happened? And he said, well, the man they called Jesus made mud and spread it all over my eyes and told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I went and washed. Now I can see. And then they asked, well, where is he now? And he's like, I don't know. Which makes perfect sense, right? Because this guy had never seen Jesus before. He'd only heard him. He'd never seen him. Jesus could have been standing right there in front of him. He would have never known. Maybe that describes your experience with Jesus. Maybe like the blind man in this story, you've had something happen in your life that you can't explain. You've thought it through and thought, there's got to be an explanation for this. You know, I got the job that I didn't think I would get. Or, you know, the doctor said there was something on the x-ray, but now there's not. And you just chalked it up to coincidence, serendipity, happenstance. But let me throw this out for you to consider. What if those things, those experiences weren't just coincidence, good luck, or good fortune? What if it was God? And like the blind man in this story, you just didn't see him. This man is miraculously healed. But it's interesting, instead of celebration, there's deliberation. Why? Because he said it was Jesus who had healed him. And word on the street was that this Jesus guy was a rebel rabbi. He was a deceiver, a liar, a lunatic that was leading people down a path they should never go down. And so the religious leaders, the religious elite, were out to get Jesus, to silence him, to arrest him, to get him out of town, or even worse. And so these people took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees, the religious leaders, because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him. That's why Jesus used mud to heal this guy. It wasn't because the mud had some miraculous, some miracle property in it. He made the mud because he knew it would ruffle the religious feathers. And he was part of his mission was to expose the way these people were thinking about God and how to approach God, that it was all about what they did and they earned their way to God. And he's like, no, it's not that. And so what happened is they had turned the Sabbath, they had become blind to what the Sabbath was, what it was originally created for. God created the Sabbath for man, so they could take a day off their regular work. I mean, how awesome is that God would say, thou shalt take a day off? But he wanted them to take a day off from their regular work. And for them in a 24/7 society where if they didn't harvest food or plant, they would go without, because they didn't have refrigeration or a 7-Eleven down or a Costco down the road. And so for them it was to take a day off from collecting food and collecting water and plowing and planting fields, so they could recharge spiritually, emotionally, physically, enjoy each other's company, enjoy God, but most of all, demonstrate their trust in him that he would continue to provide for them. But the Pharisees turned it into something it was never meant to be. And so they set out and they redefined what God meant by work. And they added these bizarre laws, like how many steps you could take and all this kind of stuff. And one of them was, thou shalt not make mud on the Sabbath. Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. And failure to follow these extra rules that these religious elites have put out there, well, it was against the rules. And anyone who broke the rules, well, it wasn't going to end well for them. And Jesus broke the rules, according to them. And so the Pharisees asked the man all about it. And so he told him, he put mud over my eyes. And when I washed it away, I could see. And some of the Pharisees said, this man, Jesus, is not from God, for he is working on the Sabbath. They were locked and loaded on their perspective. They were right. This is how it works. Therefore, Jesus is not who he says he is. Can't be. Others, however, said, but how could an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs? So there was a deep division of opinion among them. It's almost like some of them were beginning to see something. The possibility that maybe they were wrong about who Jesus really was. Then the Pharisees again questioned the man who had been blind and demanded, what's your opinion about this man who healed you? And the man replied, I think he must be a prophet. Not the answer the religious elite wanted. And because no one who had been born blind had ever been healed, the Jewish leaders still refused to believe the man had been blind and could now see. So they called in his parents. And they asked them, is this your son? Was he born blind? And if so, how can he now see? And his parents replied, we know this is our son and that he was born blind, but we don't know how he can see or who healed him. Ask him. He's old enough to speak for himself. And his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders who would announce that anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue. That's why they said, he's old enough, ask him. Now, before you kind of come down on the parents and go, oh man, I can't believe that, just a quick side note here. Getting kicked out of a temple, out of the synagogue back then, was a big deal because it impacted your life on so many different levels. Not only were you now banned from going and presenting offerings and sacrifices to God and meeting with God, you now had no access to food or water or money should you need it. Should you find yourself in need of some help? Because that was their social system. That's how they helped one another, was through the temple. And it's not like today where they could have just said, well, we'll just go across the street to the second temple of Jerusalem, or, oh, I'll go to the community temple down the street. There wasn't any. There was one temple. That's it. And if you were kicked out of that, It didn't go well. It was horrible on so many different levels. And so for the second time, the religious leaders, called in the man who had been blind and told him, God should get the glory for this because we know this man, Jesus, is a sinner. Again, they're locked and loaded on their perspective. We've got this whole thing figured out. And this guy said, I love what he says, this blind man, he says, I don't know whether he's a sinner, but I know this, and here's the line, I was blind, and now I can see. That's the line from Amazing Grace. That's where it came from. Well, the religious leaders are frustrated, and they've had enough. It's like, okay, enough of this. We've got to draw a line in the sand here, and so they threw him out of the synagogue. They kicked him out. Now he finds himself on the street. You just can imagine what's going through his mind. I mean, he must be in total shock and disbelief. He's gone from having the best day of his life to now the worst. He's been kicked out of his community. As a blind man, at least he could beg. Now he's not blind. He's got no way to support himself. But then we read this incredible exchange between Jesus and this man who was once blind, but now sees. When Jesus heard what had happened, he went and found the man. That's Jesus' MO. He came to seek and save those who were lost. And he asked the man, do you believe in the Son of Man? Which is a title that Jesus used to describe himself. And the man answered, who is he, sir? I want to believe him. Remember, he hasn't seen Jesus. He doesn't know what he looks like. And Jesus says, you have seen him. And he's speaking to you. And he says, yes, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped Jesus. It's really interesting in this story to see this man's progression of getting to know who Jesus is. It starts off with him not knowing who Jesus is, to him moving to thinking he knows who Jesus is, a prophet, to wanting to believe he knows who he is, the Son of God, to actually believing that he is the Son of Man. And he calls him Lord. You see, this story, although this man received his physical sight, he also gained spiritual sight. He realized how much he needed Jesus. Yeah, he was thankful to him, but he realized, man, I need you in my life. And listen to what Jesus said to him next. He said, then Jesus told him, he says, I entered this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think they see that they are blind. To show those who think they see that they are blind. This is all to do with spiritual blindness. Just before the religious leaders kicked this man out, they said to him, you were born a sinner. It's about the only thing they got right in this story. Because the truth is, we all are. Every single one of us are born sinners. But here's the thing, we don't like to see ourselves that way. We like to think we're good. We pay our taxes. We obey the law. Well, maybe except the speed limit. We volunteer and we give to charity. And we think that's good enough, and it's not good enough. But we don't like to think that. But that's the blindness that Jesus came to restore, to heal. And it all starts with admitting that we are deeply flawed and in need of rescue. You know, the first step in any recovery is admitting there's a problem. That's why the first step is the hardest, because you're admitting that you can't manage your life and that you're kind of a slave to whatever your drug of choice is. But here's the thing, without step 1, there is no step 2 or step 3 or 4, all the way through, which ultimately means there's no healing. The first step into entering into a real, intimate, personal relationship with Jesus Christ starts with admitting that there's a problem. And it's inside us, and it keeps us separated from God. We can't fix the gap that's there. And here's another thing. The gap that exists doesn't deserve to be filled. That's where grace, the unmerited, unfavored, unearned, undeserved favor of God comes in. And that's what makes it so amazing. Because he just gives it, but he doesn't have to. Remember when I got my first pair of glasses? It was humbling to actually admit that I needed glasses. You know, I did this for a long time thinking, well, I can still see. And it was hard. But I'll tell you what, life got a whole lot better once I kind of got over myself and admitted that I needed help to actually see. And that whole illustration there is my feeble way of saying it's the same with Jesus. It can be humbling to admit that you need Jesus in your life. But I'll tell you, life is a whole lot better with him. Not just in this one, but in the next one to come. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Written by a guy who finally saw that the slave trade he was involved in, the injustice of it all, and he thought, oh, I finally see it. And then he was found. He was blind, but now he saw. I'm going to close in prayer. And I don't know where you are in your relationship with Jesus, but you know, if you're listening and you've never taken that first step of admitting that, man, I just can't do this. You know, I've never surrendered my life to Jesus, then I'm going to pray a prayer that you can pray right from the comfort of your own home. Just sincerely pray it from the heart and just repeat the words after me. And if you do that, I would encourage you to let us know either through an email, admin@themeetingplace.org, or go into the chat room and hit the prayer button and let one of our hosts know, because we would love to pray for you, with you, and help you on your journey as you continue to take steps. So I just invite you to pray this prayer. Jesus, I want to just thank you for making me and loving me, even when I've ignored you and gone my own way. Thank you for helping me see that I need you in my life. I'm sorry for my sins, and I ask that you would forgive me. I thank you for dying on the cross for me. Help me to understand it more. As much as I know how, I want to follow you. And I invite you into my life.